you can buy at any point in the market. You can buy a median price home or even a high price luxury home and then pay the mortgage down and build wealth faster.
Hey, this is Roland Frasier. I'm here today with Brian Page from Airbnb Formula, right?
BNB Formula. Yes.
BNB Formula. Okay, because you can't say Airbnb because that'd be bad.
Yes.
Okay, so it's B, then the letter N,
Yep.
then B, then Formula.
Yeah, just take the air off.
Okay, awesome. So what do you, just to share with everybody that's listening, can you tell us a little bit about you? I know you've got like 2 or 3 really cool things going. Can you kind of say, this is what I'm doing now? I know you've got a multi-7-figure business that you've built here over the last few years.
Yeah.
And just share where you are and what it is, and then we'll dive into the
Sure.
good stuff beyond that.
So I teach people how to build an Airbnb business from scratch and scale it to 6 or 7 figures a year.
Okay.
And they don't have to own property to do that. And that's something I've done for years and just recently started teaching.
Okay. And so what is it? What is that Airbnb business? What does that mean?
Well, basically, I was a real estate investor for many, many years.
Mm-hmm.
And during the big crash of 2008, I lost all my property.
Mm-hmm.
And so I had to start over. And I started over with just a spare room on Airbnb. And then I started trying to think of ways to scale it without buying property.
That wasn't actually that long after Airbnb started, was it?
No, it was pretty early
was it like
on.
06, 07 that they started?
Yeah, I didn't get involved for a few years after that. But,
Okay.
But I was looking for a way to create cash flow, essentially, into my life. And I started thinking maybe I could control property with leases and renting. And so that's what I did. I started renting a whole bunch of properties.
So what is the formula? What is the short version of that?
Well, the formula basically is to find property owners that would be willing to let you use their property to put on Airbnb,
Mm-hmm.
and then massively scaling that across a whole bunch of properties, a portfolio of properties on Airbnb.
Okay.
Yeah.
So can you give us an example of what you've done with that?
Yeah, well, my first year when I first started, I got enough properties where I was making about 6 figures my first 6 months, and
Mm-hmm.
I made over $300,000 the very first year with small properties, studios and 1-bedrooms, that kind of thing.
What area of the world were you doing that?
In Charleston, South Carolina.
Okay, great. So not like New York City or LA or something like that.
Small town.
Actual smaller town.
Yep. And then I started thinking, man, nobody is really teaching this. Maybe I should teach this to people. And people were reaching out to me already, asking a bunch of questions about how I was doing what I was doing.
Nice.
And so that led in naturally to teaching.
So you have 3 businesses. You have real estate investing.
Yep.
You have the actual Airbnb business that you do, which is a refreshing thing for some people that teach and don't do it, right? And You've got the how to do the thing that you're doing.
Yeah,
right?
Digital products and teaching and courses and that kind of thing.
Nice. So let's talk about the Airbnb business, and then we'll talk about the formula a little bit later on. What does that look like? So if you're going to break it down, I know that you have the whole thing in the course, but give us the crash course in here are the steps. So you said you find people who have property that will then let you do the Airbnb thing. How does that work? I've got property.
Sure.
Well, have the conversation with me.
There's a couple different ways to do it. The first way that I got started was leasing property. So I just looked for any rental that was on the market, and I would approach those owners and tour their property like I was a prospective tenant. And then I would essentially pitch them and say, here's why you should work with me. Here's all the advantages of working with me versus a traditional tenant. And I would agree to sign a year lease with them. And then I would turn around with their permission, written permission, to then list that property on Airbnb.
Okay.
And so I would make generally 200 to 300% more by the night than what it cost me to control the property.
Okay. So let's give an example. So let's say that they had it listed for $1,000 a month. What do you tell them?
So $1,000 a month, I would say, Mr. Homeowner, I want to lease your property, and I'm going to take great care of it. I'm going to insure it with my own insurance policy. You're going to be covered for liability insurance. And I'm going to take care of minor maintenance on the property. So usually anything under $100 I would cover. And then what I'm going to do is I'm not going to live in the property. I want to take this thing and put it on Airbnb and have short-term guests come into town and stay there. And I'm going to furnish it and professionally clean it a couple times a week. And that's what I want to do. And if you're willing to sign a lease with me, I'll sign one right now and we'll get started. And there's no extra work for you. You're just signing a lease with me. Okay. And so a lot of owners would say no and some would say yes. And that's kind of how I got started.
Okay. And so it's not like sharing it with me or anything like that. Do you do any deals like that?
That's where I graduated to later on.
Okay.
Actually, with students of mine, they first presented the idea to me. They were like, well, why do you sign a lease if you could just partner with the owner?
Right. Well, before we talk, I like that.
Yeah.
Before we talk about that, so let's say, how does this work? So you now rented it, you're paying $1,000 a month. what do you do next?
Sure. So once you lease the property, I teach people to try to push back the start of their lease at least a few weeks so they have time to get furnishings together, get everything they need together if they're not finding a furnished property.
Okay.
So then you're going to list it on Airbnb by the night. And like I said, typically a property will bring in 200 to 300% more than whatever the rent is. So $1,000 property could bring in that $3,000 a month.
And is it fair to say that you just look on Airbnb for similar properties to figure out how to price it? Or
there's several ways to do that. There's some online tools where you can actually find very specifically what other comparable properties are charging by the night.
Yeah. Like what?
Well, there's one called AirDNA.
Okay.
AirDNA.co. It's not .com, but .co, and it's an amazing service.
Wow.
You can sign up and you can actually put in a property address just about anywhere, and it'll spit out a number and tell you this is what you can make.
So it runs the comps, basically.
It essentially runs
what
the
they call it,
comps.
CMA, the comparative market analysis, basically.
Absolutely. It's the same thing. They pull in all the data from Airbnb on the backside that you can't find otherwise. You can buy the report for your zip code or for your city or for a specific address, and then it gives you confidence to know I could earn this much with this property.
That is actually a really cool thing.
It's really cool. AirDNA.
Co.
Yeah. So the CEO, Scott, I've known for quite a while, and a great guy, and he was an Airbnb host himself, and he just couldn't find that data, and so he created a company to go mine that data.
That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
So, okay. So now you know what to charge from that, and then you list it.
So the goal is to have that thing listed within just a couple days of when the lease starts, so immediately, so you can start generating cash flow on it. And then you're going to pay the owner what they're asking, and you're going to pay the utilities on the property. So let's say it's a few $100s in utilities, and then the rest is net income to you. So my very first property was a 1-bedroom, and I netted $1,600 the first month on that property. $1,600. So coming from a traditional real estate investing background, my 1-bedrooms were cash flowing $200 or $300 a month. So to make $1,600 all the way up to $2,000 every month on that one little property, that could change a lot of people's lives if they just had one of those listings, in their life.
No kidding. Yeah.
Yeah, that's a tremendous amount of income.
Pay your rent.
Yeah, $24,000 a year on a little 1-bedroom, and of course that's all completely relative to where you live and what the market is. So if you're in an area where a 1-bedroom is $600, like middle America, you're not going to make as much as if you're in a big city.
But chances are, if you live in that place, your cost of living is less as well.
Your cost of living is less, and you can always just go get more units to be able to make more money.
Because it's like, move to New York and you can sell it for $8,000 a month, but your rent's now $8,000 a month.
Exactly.
Okay, cool. Any other cool tools that help with that?
Let's see. Yeah, there are. There are services now that completely automate your guest communication. So
I'm taking notes.
Sure.
I'm not texting.
So the biggest job with running multiple properties on Airbnb or VRBO or any of these sites is the guest communication, because you're essentially running a distributed hotel. So instead of all your rooms being in one hotel, like the one we're sitting in, your rooms are all over town or all over in different states or countries even. And now you have guests checking in, checking out, constantly needing whatever. They might need extra towels. They might want to know how to get the door unlocked. It could be anything, right?
So it just basically takes the hassle out.
It's a lot of work.
Yeah.
So when I started getting past about 5 or 6 listings, it became like a full-time job. And I couldn't figure out how to get out of that because I wanted to, reduce my number of hours in the business. So I started looking online. There were companies out there that I found that actually will take all that off your hands and do 100% of the communication with the guests. And they actually have live human beings. Some of it's automated, but some of it's actually live people. And so now for about 3 to 5% of your revenue, you can let them take over everything. So now
that's pretty cheap.
Oh, it's not bad at all. Yeah. So you're outsourcing this. There's a company called Guesty, for example. Guesty is over in Israel.
How do you spell it?
Guesty, Guesty.com.
Okay.
And there's other companies.
In Israel.
In Israel, yeah. They're based in Israel, and they're just exploding, size-wise, because they're essentially riding the coattails of this booming industry. So there's a lot of companies that have sprung up like that. So you can outsource your communication. So now the actual day-to-day to run a whole bunch of properties is next to nothing. So
the communications, is that just with the guest, or is that also with like a cleaning company and all that kind of stuff?
That could be that could be coordinating the cleaning. That could be, let's say, something comes up that is not an emergency, but an emergency in the eye of the guest has to be taken care of. That can also be automated. So that's going to be before, during, and after a stay. So somebody says, "Hey, Roland, I'd like to stay in your property. Will you discount a little bit to stay there?" Well, that process would normally have to go through me, and now it's fully automated. So I can just tell my virtual, I call it my virtual front desk, yes, you just go ahead and give that guest a 5% discount and get the booking done.
Wow.
And what do I do in this case, and what do I do in that case? So we have a whole list of policies that take place, so I don't have to be involved.
So cool.
So once I set that in place and had all that arranged with my cleaning company, I essentially was working just a few hours a week, literally the 4-hour work week, and I was making multiple 6 figures a year.
Nice.
So I just set off traveling the world, kind of like you do, and just living that lifestyle. And that's kind of where people started wondering what I was up to.
Okay. And so they started asking, hey, how do I do this?
Lots of questions, friends of friends on Facebook and, social media, just wondering what I was up to. Friends from college, everybody's like, can you tell us what exactly you're doing? Because you're not working, obviously.
So let me run through the math. We've got the place. It's $1,000.
Yep.
We've done our DNA research. We see it can now be, we could, if it was, is that as if it was rented every night, or that it could do 2 or 3 times, or
a
certain number of nights a week, or what?
No, you get 70% occupancy and
70.
still
Is that
be
a fair,
very profitable.
like a fair thing to shoot for?
From what they say, from what they told me at AirDNA, the average is about 65% of the calendar be booked.
Okay.
My students get much, much higher. I get 90% plus.
And you have ways to do that, which
you have your ways to
obviously
improve
you
that.
teach. So let's look at that then. Let's say that it's only 60, right? And let's say that out of 30 days in a month on average, then you're getting 18 days, right? At And would you divide that out? I'm just trying to figure out on this hypothetical thing we're doing here. So if I did it 60%, what would I come up with probably, do you think?
Well, the way I like to do it, the way I make a decision on any property is I try to figure out what the weekend rate is first. So if we have a $1,000 property, I'm going to divide it by 8. I call it the rule of 8.
Okay.
Because I want to know that just on the weekends I can break even. So that's $125 a night.
Okay.
So I ask myself, will that $1,000 unit make me $125 per night on the weekends? Because I know weekends always book. They just do in almost any market.
Interesting. Okay.
So if that's the rule, then I know in 8 days I've broken even on the rent, another couple days to pay for the utilities, and then every other day that month is going to be profit in my pocket. So let's say I book another 10 days at $100 a night, a little bit less because it's a weekday.
Okay.
Now I made $1,000 in my pocket that month.
Okay, cool.
So that's kind of how I figure it. I try to break even on the weekends, and then everything else is gravy.
And work-wise, you have the work of finding the property and doing the lease to start out with. I love that you do the delay that helps you get ready.
Yep.
You've got some small outlay in furniture.
Yeah, I try to aim for furnished properties. It depends on what market people are in, because some markets there's lots of furnished properties and some there's none.
Okay.
So early on, I looked for furnished properties, and I'd say about half my units are furnished, half aren't.
Okay.
But
is one better than the other? Do you find hassle-wise or any otherwise?
Well, furnished is sometimes more expensive per month, but you can immediately, no hassle, just take a couple towels and some soaps and shampoos, put them in there, and you're ready to go.
You're good to go, yeah.
So it's super, super fast. If you have to furnish it, now that's something where you got to know how to furnish it inexpensively if you're not going to spend a lot of money. So I've kind of learned how to do that. And so you have to furnish it, and essentially what I call stage it. Stage it means make it look like it's ready for guests.
Right.
And then you're going to bring in a photographer. You could photograph it yourself, but I recommend hiring a professional because the photos are the number one determination.
Even the founders said that they used,
so important.
It was a big difference between when they went out with their cameras into New York for their first listings and took pictures of the things. That's when their business actually, because before that,
amateur hour,
Airbnb was like, it's not really working out. Right?
I've taken clients of mine and we've improved their net cash flow by 200%. So in other words, we doubled their
just with the
photos because everybody thinks I take great photos with their phone, but they just don't.
Did you just get a photographer, kind of any photographer, or is there a special kind?
Real estate photographer, I'd recommend.
Any real estate photographer.
So you want somebody who has a wide angle lens that can capture the whole room and knows how to do lighting properly and maybe even touched up after the fact. And so it's kind of the same thing that hotels do. I borrow a lot of my things that I teach from the hotel industry. So I don't know if you've probably experienced this before. You see a photo of a room on a hotel, and then when you get there, it's like, well, this isn't nearly as big as it looked. And it's not as grand as it looked.
I am suspicious of those bent corners that fisheye kind of gives away, right? It just occurred to me, you should chat with Cole from Cole's Classroom about an opportunity joint venture, because to me, it seems like that there would also be an opportunity for people who have an interest in photography to become real estate photographers of Airbnb properties.
Oh, yeah.
And you've got the list of people. So
absolutely.
That might be something to
Oh, yeah. I think that
about.
would be useful. And so understanding how to present it, because it's essentially marketing. You have to learn how to market your property. Mm-hmm. Most people on Airbnb, I would say 99% of them are completely amateurs. They don't know what they're doing when it comes to marketing something. So I can take a unit, like one of my units is exactly the same unit, same building as another unit, but I earn considerably more per night because of the way I presented that unit, the way it's staged, the way it looks, the way it's presented. And somebody who doesn't know my city, if they look at it, they're not looking at these two units and saying, why is this one more money? They're just looking at this unit and saying, wow, honey, let's stay here.
Rather stay there.
And the price isn't even a consideration for some of these people because they're looking at a range, a continuum of prices. They're like, I don't know, I could spend $100 or $300 a night, somewhere in there.
Yeah, and even though that's 3 times as much and it sounds like a lot, it's not to have a nice place.
Especially if it's
like,
they're
on
on
vacation.
vacation.
Sleep here. Yeah, exactly.
Yeah. And they're looking at it like, they don't know your area. Most people that are traveling to your city or to your town, they don't know what a property should make. So people say, well, I don't think I can make that much money on the property. I said, you never know until you test it with the marketplace. You always want to just test it and see if people will pay what you're asking. You'd be surprised.
So if I'm going back to our math, is it fair to assume that you would have about 100% occupancy on every weekend night?
Oh yeah, absolutely. 100% occupancy. I've seen that in every market.
Okay. So would that be reasonable to say, in our example, it was 125, so 250 a weekend. So it was $1,000 for the average 4 weekend. And some weekends, some months have more than 4 weekends, right?
Yep.
So then you're saying if I can break even on my weekends, I'm good because everything else is profit.
I look at that as the safest way to figure it out because you do have other expenses like your utilities, but the cleaning fee is always added on. So you always add that on. So it's not a cost that comes out of your pocket because it's added on top of the booking, what you're charging per night.
Okay.
So essentially that's the easiest way to calculate if it's a good deal or not. And so for example, at $125 a night, if I saw that nobody was charging that, then I probably wouldn't get that property. If I saw a lot of people were charging $200 a night on the weekends,
you're like, I'm gold.
I would say I got to do this because not only am I going to cover my rent, I'm going to cover all my utilities, and I know I'm not going to book 8 or 10 days. I might book another 15 weekdays. So it gets really, really profitable quickly. And regardless, even if you can make $1,000 a month net on one little unit, that's 4 times more than a typical real estate investor would make on a little 1-bedroom or studio.
And you got no money out of pocket.
And you have no money out of pocket.
Except a deposit maybe, right?
Yeah, well, you have first month's rent. Let's say we have a furnished place. We're going to come up with first month's rent and deposit and maybe a couple little toiletries and sundries that you might need to get going. But you're creating cash flow immediately from an asset that you don't own, which is amazing. And I don't know many businesses that you could start and be profitable in the first 30 days. And then as long as you control that property, you're making money.
Yeah.
And it's pretty predictable. I mean, there are markets that are extremely seasonal. If you're, say, in a ski resort town, it might be really seasonal. But most places are going to be fairly level, and you're going to be profitable every month, maybe more profitable some months.
Yeah.
And there's nothing quite like it. It's kind of the intersection of real estate and technology because it's not really all real estate, and it's not completely all technology because it's an app. Airbnb is an app, but it's an intersection of those two things, and I think it's great. And then there's the third way. So the first way is, well, I didn't mention the second way. I'm sorry. The first way is to lease and control it through a lease.
Okay.
The second way is to partner with an owner, and this is what they call co-hosting. So this is where I approach you and I say, Mr. Homeowner, you've got this property you're asking $1,000 a month for. What if I could show you how to make $1,500 a month on that same property with no work on your part, nothing that you need to do. I'll take care of everything. You'd be like, well, explain how that works. I'd say, well, I want to take your property and list it on Airbnb. And what I'll do is I'll guarantee you your first $1,000 that you're already asking for that property goes to you, that we make. Everything over that, we're going to split 50-50. Now, that I don't know what that'll be, but whatever that is, 50-50. Yeah. And so there's really no risk to you because it's going to be a month-to-month agreement. And I'll say at any point you don't like this arrangement, you can walk. Just give me a 60-day notice so I can inform the guests.
Right.
And so that's called co-hosting. So this allows people to truly get started with zero money. Because if you have a furnished property, there's no deposit, no credit. Yeah, exactly. I just have to convince you, right? So there's no credit involved. There's no real upfront cost involved. There's no lease. There's no rent or deposit. There's really no risk. And you're not committing yourself for a year. So the disadvantage there, though, is that you're not getting all the profit. You have to share the profit with the owner. But I tell people to start that way if they don't have any money.
Sure.
So I had to,
Yeah, no, and liability wise and everything. It's just
liability wise, and I had a gentleman that saw me speak on stage at a local RIA. This was in North Carolina, and he approached me. He was literally homeless. He said, "I don't have any money to buy your program, buy your course, but I really want to do this." And I said, "Well, are you really homeless?" First of all, I didn't know if I believed the guy, and people there assured me that he was. He'd come to some of these meetings, and so I gave him a scholarship to the training, and he followed up a few months later, and he got his first co-hosting deal. So he's making money now. A guy that told me he had no credit.
Keeps on, he can stay in his own places.
Exactly.
He's not homeless anymore.
Exactly. So it just shows you that it's open to really anybody, and that's what I love about it. And then the third method is essentially acquiring properties and building wealth by owning.
Okay.
and then turning those into B&Bs.
Okay. And so is there any part of your course that talks about that, or is there any trick or
No, primarily I
hack?
focus on helping people without owning property to get
Okay.
into Airbnb. I've just recently started getting back into real estate investing myself now. And so what I've been doing is buying properties, renovating them, and then turning them into full-time B&Bs.
Mm-hmm.
And I've actually been doing it at the low end of the market at low-income neighborhoods. And people thought it wouldn't work, but it's actually worked really well. And the ROI is much higher than on say a median-priced home because you can buy a house that literally you can pay it off in 1 to 2 years, between 1 and 2 years, which is unbelievable.
Give me some numbers on that.
So I'll give you a number. So I just bought a house for $45,000.
Okay.
Put another 40 into renovating it. So full renovation. So I'm all in at 85. And last month I made $4,870 in bookings on Airbnb. So at that rate, I'm going to be somewhere, 45,000 for the year, which means in 2 years I'll have got all my money back. In this case, I paid cash for it, but if I had a mortgage on it, I could pay it off in full. And I just picked up another house for $44,000, and it's a 3-bedroom. It needs a little bit of renovation, but I calculate a little over a year, I'll get my money back on that one. And that's because, even at $100 a night to $200 a night on the weekends, we're talking pretty considerable amount of cash flow on a cheap property. And a family that's looking for a place to stay with 3 bedrooms, $100 a night is a much better deal than staying in a hotel or 3 hotel rooms.
Yeah. So who is taking those properties, and how do you screen like the scary area of town versus the,
Well, this was kind of an experiment because I went into a neighborhood, very large neighborhood that had no Airbnbs at all. It wasn't in the area that most people would stay. And honestly,
so why wouldn't they stay there? Let's just kind of drill down.
Why would they stay there?
Why would they not stay there? Why weren't people staying there?
Well,
why did it not have?
It was a rough neighborhood. There's a lot of houses that need renovating. There was a few that even were boarded up, not in the same street, but in that area.
Okay.
Property
so it was
values,
actually as kind of a sketchy area.
It was a very sketchy area, very sketchy area. And at first, I had a couple people say they wouldn't even stay there. And so what we did is we changed the description to be brutally honest. No, people were saying I need a refund because I don't feel comfortable staying here, even though I knew it wasn't a war zone or anything like that. It wasn't like a violent neighborhood, but it was a rough neighborhood, and there were some renovations going on. Real estate investors are starting to acquire properties in there, and it's very quickly transitioning. But some people asked for refunds. So what I did is I went to Airbnb and I changed my description, and I said, this is not the kind of neighborhood that, people sip their wine with their pinky out. This is a very blue collar neighborhood, and it is rough around the edges, but the house is perfect.
Right.
It's an adorable little bungalow, and you'll love staying here if you're okay with that. And after doing that, I never had one more request for a refund.
Nice.
So that was kind of cool. So I just kind of positioned it as, I'm going to tell you the honest truth. And I went into all the things, and I said, look, this is an ugly neighborhood. I basically just called it ugly, but the house is a bargain because you're getting $100 a night to $200 a night for a 3-bedroom house. And so it's been booked just 90% every month. Actually, 95. I think we had 2 or 3 days open for July, and we're almost at 5,000 for July, and there's a couple of days still open. So, do you
offer like an optional gun rental service? Just like the extra $10
the shotgun
a day.
Is under the shotgun under the bed.
Break the glass, but when you break it, you bought it.
Exactly. Only in case of emergency. So I've been acquiring, in these areas and renovating, and just trying it as kind of an experiment. But you can buy at any point in the market. You can buy a median price home or even a high price luxury home, and then pay the mortgage down and build wealth faster, whether it's 2 years or 5 years or 6 years. It's much faster than trying to pay off a house with a tenant.
Yeah, no kidding.
So you're building wealth very fast. You get to enjoy the cash flow and the equity.
That's great. So are you focused more on that of the 3 options right now for yourself?
I'm doing a little bit of all of those. And what keeps me the busiest is teaching and helping other people get results, and my students.
Yeah. Nice. Now, so why teach?
Well, I wasn't planning to set out to teach originally, but when I first went online, I was trying to learn how to do it, and I couldn't find anything. There weren't even YouTube videos. I was like, how do you manage a whole bunch of properties? How do you build a big Airbnb business, for example? And there was nothing out there. This was a few years ago. And so I thought, wow, there's nobody teaching this. Maybe I should teach this. And people were already asking me questions. And
yeah, that's what I was going to say. Is you're answering the questions.
Yeah,
it's
I was asking the same questions over and over again.
This is how I don't have to say the same thing a million times.
Yeah, and I was like, I don't want to. I mean, is it rude of me to ask to get paid for this because I'm taking so much of my time to help all these people. So I
Right.
started just basically documented everything I'd ever done in my business, and then try to make it in some kind of coherent system that I could teach. And I just built it into basically an 8-week program. And then I launched that. I called it the BNB Formula, and didn't know what was going to happen. And the course was selling okay, but I didn't know if it actually would work. So I thought, be a way to make some money, but hopefully it'll work.
Mm-hmm.
And then at one point, I essentially surveyed everybody that ever bought the course and said, can you please send me your stories and tell me if you're having success? And I was flooded with video testimonials of people that had success, and I couldn't believe the results people were having.
That's cool.
It was actually working, and that really fired me up.
Nice.
And got me excited.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
So as far as additional costs that somebody might not be thinking about besides cleaning and the rent and the utilities, is there anything else that kind of comes up, or anything that surprised you in the past?
There's no big cost. I would recommend that people should form an entity at some point, an LLC or a corporation. They don't need to do that immediately. Okay. Most hosts on Airbnb don't have anything like that set up. But once you start actually running it like a business, you need to set one of those up. It's not extremely expensive to do. Mm-hmm. And then, no, I mean, there's really, depending on which model you go with, I call it the low money, the mo money, or the no money methods.
Right.
So there is a way to do it with basically no money.
Yeah.
And so it's kind of open to everybody, but there's not a lot of costs involved.
Okay.
Unless you're furnishing.
Yeah. What about profit centers? Are there other ways to make money doing it besides the rent?
There are. And actually, once again, I got some of my best ideas from my students.
Yeah.
So one of my students is in Washington State, this girl named Tia. She's 26 years old. She's got 10 properties. She tells everybody she's retired. She's making several $100,000s a year off these properties. She's never signed a lease. She's done only co-hosting with people. And she found a really unique way to make money.
Just off 10 properties? She's making with a co-host.
10 properties, just co-hosting.
Daggone, that's nice.
Doing extremely well, yes. And she's automated everything and doesn't work a whole lot. But she decided to kind of come up with something that fit her interests, which is she likes staging and decorating. So she approached owners and said, I want to turn your property into an Airbnb, but it's got to be furnished first. And in order to do that, it's going to take about $10,000, and I charge $5,000, so you're going to need about $15,000. Mm-hmm. And people were like, okay. So she's making $5,000 to furnish somebody's place, and sometimes upwards of $10,000 or $15,000, depending on the property. So she makes money doing what she loves, which is staging these properties. Immediately, she makes money. And then she makes the cash flow on top of running the unit as well. So she's doing
the 50-50 over the rent kind of thing.
She does the 50-50 split with the owner. Uh-huh. And that's kind of one of her profit centers now is essentially setting up properties for Airbnb.
Nice.
Yeah.
That's really cool. So in her case, do you know what the price range of the lease and the...
Yeah, I would say, I think she told me where she's at, it's somewhere between $2,000 and $4,000 a month for a typical rental. So somewhere in there.
Nice.
And I've always done it on the cheap. I've always paid for my own stuff and put it in the property. But the way she's doing it, she's making the owner pay for it. So the owner pays for their own stuff and pays her for her fee. And then she did something even beyond that. She started finding listings that weren't in her area. And then she would essentially broker those listings to other people in other areas.
Makes sense.
Somebody 2 hours away, she'd say, I just found this listing because people know about me. And I'm going to now, sell it to you or take a cut of what you're making essentially to turn you onto this listing. So now she's kind of brokering listings. She's got all kinds of neat things going on. So I've heard of things like that. And there are other ways to make money. And now Airbnb has experiences, so you can host people. So if you got free time and you want to go, I don't know, teach them yoga or something, you can make money hosting experiences on Airbnb.
That's really cool.
Yeah.
Any other profit centers that have come up from your creative students?
Let me think here. Yes, there is another one. One of my students in Scottsdale does lease options. Mm-hmm. So what he'll do is he controls the property through a lease, puts it on Airbnb and VRBO, and then has the option to buy it, at which time this is with multi-million-dollar properties, by the way. At that time, he'll try to sell the property at some point exercise his option to purchase the property and then resell it at a higher price. So cool. He's done 6-figure paychecks on these bigger homes after running the property as a short-term rental.
That's pretty cool.
So that's another profit center.
What is the next phase that you see coming, if any, with Airbnb and this sort of thing? And are there other Airbnbs out there that might be more opportunity like VRBO or other places that HomeAway?
There's other platforms that are great. I have always stuck to Airbnb, and I've only taught that one platform because I was able to fill my calendars just using that one platform.
Right.
Now, VRBO is good for certain things. If you're in a all vacation market, like a coastal area, or you're in a luxury property, you might want to focus on VRBO. But Airbnb has been excellent to me, and my students only use it. So I kind of focused on only teaching that one niche. But the whole industry as a whole is growing very, very fast. It's still projected to continue growing at the rate it's been for quite a while. And right now, the interesting thing is what's going on internationally. So 3 of every 4 listings in the world that are short-term rentals are overseas. They're not in the U.S., even though it's a U.S.-based company. Mm-hmm. So people in other countries are finding these opportunities. So for example, when I went to Egypt and my guide that took me around the pyramids with the camels and everything, he does Airbnb. Mm-hmm. He makes more money with his Airbnb unit than he does as a camel guy.
Camel guy, yeah. And
same thing when I was in Costa Rica. I was on a river rafting, and my guide was talking to me, and he didn't know anything about what I did. And he's like, that's my home right there. We're about to float by my home. And he pointed at his house on the riverbank. It was beautiful, on this just beautiful river. And he said, I'm thinking about doing something called Airbnb. And I said, just out of curiosity, what do you rent that thing for? He said, $200 a month. And I said, well, I'm paying $65 to stay in this hotel that's dumpy.
Right.
I'd much rather stay there. Do you realize that how much money you could make having gringos like me stay in your little Airbnb? You'd make a killing.
Right.
And he was like, really? Wow. So it's something now that everybody around the world is starting to hear about, and it has a huge opportunity for people in other countries that just don't have opportunities to make money. And now they can turn their property into a real asset and start making money with it. So that's really exciting.
That's awesome. I love it. So is there anything else that helps you run when you get to, say, 5 or 10 properties? Is there software? Is there part of your system maybe that's offered? I don't know. How do you when you get to 10 or 20 properties, how do you not go nuts?
Well, you have to have really good partners. And by that, I mean, you have to have a really good cleaning company that can scale with you. So if you can find a franchise company that controls and cleans hundreds of properties, it's not a big deal for them to take on 10 more of yours. Right. So you can't rely on somebody who is, one person to go manage them all. And so I recommend having a good team in place. As you start getting to a certain level, then there's all kinds of tools out there that do pricing models to try to help you price out your specific days and figure out how to boost what you can make on the calendar and that kind of thing. But I would say that, really the communication with the guests is the biggest thing that you have to overcome, because you want to make sure your guests are getting that 5-star experience, because the ratings are what's going to help you continue to make more bookings. Okay. And I found that using VAs, virtual assistants, is sometimes just as good, if not better, than these services, and it costs a lot less. Okay. So what I've been teaching lately with my students is you can hire a VA, and nowadays there's all kinds of VAs that do nothing but Airbnb listings, they do it all for multiple different hosts.
So you're hiring them to create the listing? Is that
you're hiring them to manage your listings, to essentially manage your entire business? Okay. So they can be in touch with your cleaning company and your handyman and even the owners, and everybody is managed by this VA. And a VA costs nothing, I mean, you don't have to have somebody that has any real advanced expert technical, tech skills to be able to do this kind of things. Really, anybody can do it. And you can take a VA who's never done Airbnb, who's willing to learn and available, and teach them how to do it. So for $5 to $10 an hour, you have somebody who's always at the ready to take calls, to respond to texts and messages. And essentially now you're out of the loop. So you're running your little hotel, and you can scale it to whatever size you like. I mean, I read about people that were doing millions of dollars on Airbnb from Forbes. Yeah. And now I have 2 students that are about to cross that threshold.
That's exciting.
$1 million a year in bookings. So that's really, really exciting.
So if somebody wants to learn more about this, what you do, what is the way that they could do that?
They can check me out at our website is bnbformula.com. That's bnbformula.com.
Cool. And if they wanted to email you or anything like that, are you on the socials?
Yeah. You can find me at bpagester, BPAGESTER, bpagester on any of the social channels.
Okay, fantastic. Thank you so much for coming in. I really, really appreciate it.
Thanks, Roland. Awesome. I enjoyed it.